to day 4 here. For those of you just tuning in, this is day 4 of our Bridge to Success event here, hosted by the TLDC. Go ahead and throw your name in the chat, where you're joining from. Is it lunchtime? What you eating for lunch? Feel free to eat and watch. We got a good session here. Some of you caught Chrissy's session on Monday. She's back again, former theater teacher turned instructional designer. So got some good things she wants to share with you today. And I'm going to, without any further wait, I'm going to turn it over because my dog's about to start barking. And Chrissy, go ahead.
Thanks, Abby. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning. I don't know where you are in the world, but thanks for being with us. Before we jump in, I'm going to, for accessibility purposes, share a visual description of myself. So I am white Hispanic female with dark brown hair, brown eyes. Today I'm wearing a maroon long sleeve shirt, and I've actually got windows behind me right now. So I put up a template background. It's just a generic office. I don't want to be backlit for y'all. So today I am really excited to be here again this week because I'm going to be sharing some stories and some lessons that I've learned this past year after my first year full-time as an instructional designer. But before I do that, I want to kind of set the context for you a little bit and how I got here. So I left teaching in May of 2022. I was previously a fine arts teacher for 8 years. I taught theater and technical theater and art. At one point, I was like an unofficial assistant choir director, but I'm a huge lover of the arts and very much believe in arts education. But I found myself at a place where I needed to seek other opportunities so that I could further advance my professional career. I felt a little stuck. And I left for a lot of reasons, one of which I'll get into later, but I left basically not knowing what I was going to do next, other than the place that I was currently in wasn't working for me anymore. So I was in the middle of working on my master's degree. So I finished that in the summer of 2022 and graduated that August. And then it wasn't until September of that year that I decided that I wanted to kind of continue into, hi Daphne, that I wanted to continue my career into learning and development. And it was through actually a TLDC event in September of 2022 that helped me make that decision. So I, from that event, started networking and learning all about the world of L&D. I revamped my resume, started figuring out what a portfolio was, and started building out a portfolio. And through some of the connections that I made, I had the opportunity to do some freelancing work. So October through December of 2022, I did some freelancing work, which was a really great way for me to like get some solid experience to help kind of beef up my portfolio a little bit. And then at the end of that year, I was hired on into now my full-time position. So I literally started January 3rd, 2023. So I've just finished my first full year full-time in L&D. And yeah, thank you guys. Thank you. It's very exciting. I can't believe it's already been a year. That's so wild to me. But I just wanted to share that context to kind of give you a timeline of how everything has gone, because I know that's something that a lot of people who are looking to make that transition are interested in knowing, what does a timeline like that look like? And everybody's is a little bit different, but that was mine. I very much felt like everything happened in the time that it did. And there were a lot of things I did to kind of make sure I could make that transition in the best way for me, but also to like keep things moving and, have personal goals for myself. So one of the first things I want to talk about a lesson that I've learned and something that I knew I would need to continue doing once I got my full-time position was that you're not going to stop learning once you get the job. There are so many things that you feel like you need to play catch up with when you're making a career transition like this. And I think a lot of times there's so much pressure to kind of learn every new tool that you can, every ideology that you can, in order to get the right interview or in order to snag that job. But I kind of figured out very quickly that once I got that job, that's not the end, right? That's only a milestone. I'm going into a brand new career in a brand new industry. So I need to be able to give myself the space and the grace to continue learning through that process. And one of the ways that I prioritized that was I would ask in interviews, how does your team, how does your company prioritize the professional development of its employees? I was always very open and honest about coming from teaching. I think that teachers have so many applicable skills, and a lot of times you have to kind of, like I talked about on Monday, know how to translate those skills. But I did not shy away from my past experience. So I wanted to know, like, how can I keep learning and keep growing in my position? And I had great leaders who kind of helped me do that, but I also had to take the initiative and carve that time out myself. So I would look at my calendar and my scope of work and proactively carve out time for me to continue learning and continue upskilling in different areas. So I, in collaboration with my team and on my own, was able to learn a bunch of new tools. Miro is a great planning tool that I've learned. I've played around in things like Visio, and I created a whole SharePoint site, which I've worked in tools similar to that, but each tool like that has its own little quirks and limitations and functionalities. So I've been able to pick up a whole new Rolodex of tools and skills through that advancement. I've also learned a lot about things like industry standards, which is something that you don't really get the opportunity to incorporate or impart when you're working on a project until you actually work on that project. So exploring things like, what is the standard for a review cycle with a SME? That's something that I, have learned. I am right now in the nitty-gritty of developing documentation for processes and procedures, which has been really fun to explore and kind of get all that aligned. I've done advanced programming in tools like Storyline. I'm learning a lot about project management. I am a very type A person who can manage my work very well. But when you're working with other stakeholders and you're working with other colleagues and departments and teams and SMEs, building the skills of a project manager takes time and takes practice and guidance. So that's another area that I've had to learn. And then, of course, the whole corporate structure and corporate politics, and that's its whole own thing, right? That takes experience and time to learn. And also just the business in general of the company that you're working for. It's really cool that I work on the education team, but the work that we do is, directly impacted by our services team or our development team. Everybody plays a part that contributes to the business, and learning more about the organization's business and how all the departments work together has been really fun. And of course, there's the content knowledge, right? I work for a software company, and I'm not a content expert on software, but I've learned so much more in that area than I ever thought I would. So I think the lesson there is to just know, going into a new position, it's still a learning process for you. There's still things that you're going to learn, and you just have to be proactive in doing that, and communicate with your leaders and your managers that that's something that's important to you, and you hope that they will help foster you through that. But also, you can take the initiative and kind of build your own development plan as well. So going off of that, I want to talk about working with SMEs. This is a huge lesson or lessons learned. So my first SME meeting, fun fact, was an absolute dumpster fire. Like it could not have gone any worse than what it did. And I think the tricky thing about coming from teaching is that I was the expert, right? I was the content expert. I didn't have to rely on someone else to tell me whether or not the content was right. So when you work with someone else, it can be really challenging. And there were so many aspects to, let me preface by saying this ends, it has a happy ending. So just stick with me. It didn't stay a dumpster fire. We put out the fire and now it's amazing. Yeah. So, okay. There's so many things that I was not aware of when I went into that meeting. So one thing is that our education team is still fairly young. So our organization was in the middle of a transition of what training and learning looked like at the company. We were really trying to adjust to a continuous learning style. And this SME that I had the meeting with, and a lot of people at the company, still had this idea in their head of what training meant previously at the company. So that was a hurdle that we kind of had to overcome. He at one point told me, I do not have time for you and to help you. And it wasn't in a rude way. It was very honest. He was, I think at the time, trying to fill 3 different roles on his team. And the workload of those roles he was taking on himself, in addition to all of the other work that, he had to do for his role. So he quite literally did not have time for us. So I had to really regroup and figure some things out. And I had a leader who helped me through that process, thank goodness, because I left there don't really know what I'm going to do. But I figured it out. So I went off and I started planning of what these courses and this project would look like. And the next time that I came back and met up with him, he was able to kind of see the vision for our new learning initiative and what these courses would look like and what the benefit would be, not only to his team, but to the whole organization. So from this experience, I learned that you're going to have to meet SMEs where they are a lot of the time. I appreciated that he was very open and honest with me and said, frankly, I do not have time. So now, anytime I start a project and work with SMEs, I am very upfront. I acknowledge immediately that I know that they have their own full-time workload, and it's never my intention to take time away from that or make my involvement with them or their involvement with the project a burden. I want to make the process as efficient and as streamlined as possible for them. And I think acknowledging that, goes a really, really long way. I think there's also opportunity there to help bring the SMEs forward. So once I was able to go back with him and kind of showcase different aspects of the planning development and what it would look like visually, he saw the value in what we were doing. So he came on board very quickly after that. And at one meeting later on, he actually said, I want to apologize for kind of giving you the brush off earlier. I now see what you're doing and what your team is doing. And I'm going to not only carve out time for you. I'm going to get people on my team to carve out time for you. So it was a really, really great turnaround story. And I think it's important that whenever you're working with SMEs, if you have a challenge, if it's at the beginning, if it's, somewhere in the middle of the review cycle, you always try to go back to what the purpose of what you're creating is, because you want to have that relationship and that partnership be sustainable, right? Because chances are you may need to work again with that SME in the future. We actually are working with him and his team since then. Our team has worked with them on a variety of different projects, and he's now our point person for certain content. So it was really great to kind of go through that experience and trial by fire, and have that dumpster fire and be able to put it out. But I had a great leader who helped me through that. And also, I just kind of rolled up my sleeves and figured it out. At the end of the day, this project needs to get done. So how can I do that while still utilizing this partnership in respect of his restrictions that he's got going on in his own workload? So it ended up being a really great lesson for me and taught me a lot about SME relationships and, establishing expectations and upkeeping communication, and also connecting like outside of the work that we're doing. I don't think that your SME relationship always has to be about the content. If you can take the time to connect on a personal level and, find out, well, how long have you been at the company? Well, tell me some of the projects you're working on. How can we collaborate in the future? I think having that relationship is really, really important. Yeah, like Karen's saying, the key was to sell the SME on the benefits of the training. And I think sometimes that is half the battle, especially when you're trying to usher in a new style of training, where they have kind of like a preconceived notion of what that has been prior. Being able to communicate that is so important. So huge lesson learned on my part, and I'm still learning things, with SMEs. But with every SME I work with, every project we work on, there's something that I take away that I bring into next time. Okay, my next lesson learned, and I'm smiling because Trish actually mentioned this. Trish Lechner did the session before mine, and she mentioned this. But my lesson learned is to take the vacation because Trish was my leader at the time, and she basically had to force me to take my first vacation. And the thing that was really challenging for me on this, and I think a lot of teachers go through this too, is that we could never just like take an afternoon off, take a day off. There's so much work that goes into taking care of things before you can leave. Like you've got to get the sub and do the sub plans and, warn the kids, hey, I'm not going to be here. Please be on. Oh, the guilt, Daphne, the guilt. Yes, the guilt. Warn the kids that you're not going to be there. And then the whole time you're not there, you're worried about like who's being set on fire while I'm gone, like what catastrophe is happening, what am I going to have to deal with when I get back. And so I think a lot of that kind of like inherently stayed with me, and I felt for the cleanup afterwards, the aftermath. Yep. Oh, the stories. Okay, it's fine. We're fine. So I just had a lot of that. I was like, I need to finish. Okay, this is what I had in my head. I was like, I need to finish my first project to feel comfortable taking that time off. And that was something that like a restriction that I put on myself. My leader did not put that restriction on me. She was like, girl, take a day off. No, I was like, I want to finish my first project. So I worked 4 months all the way through and did not take my first week off until I think it was like the first week of May or the second week of May, because I had that like inherent like idea that I just couldn't just up and leave. Like I needed to have some kind of accomplishment done before I left. That is not my mindset anymore, let me tell you. But it took me a long time to kind of break that. And I've learned that, the work is not going anywhere. It'll be there when you get back. And also, you don't have to go anywhere or have something huge planned to take your vacation time. That first week, I was at home. I was hanging out on the couch. I did some spring cleaning. I did walks at the park. Like, it was lovely. And so I think you don't have to have this big thing planned. Sometimes it's nice to just have a mental break. And when you're in a position where you can take that time, just take that time, because your future self will thank you. Like, you'll never be like, oh, I can't believe I scheduled a vacation next week. Like, oh, I can't go to work. No, that will never happen. So I think you can have a balance. And I'll tell you what, my other vacation that I took in August, like, I went to 0 from 100, because that August vacation, I flew to LA and went to see Taylor Swift. And then a couple days later, I flew from LA to Vegas and saw Adele. Like, I went all out. So I think this year I'm trying to find a balance between the two. Like, we can spend some time hanging out, and then we can spend some time. Oh, Tiffany, it was so much fun. Yeah. But let me tell you, it was my first vacation like that. And I don't know that I've ever taken a vacation like that. Like, honestly, ever. Because all of the time that we have off from holidays as a teacher or over the summer, it's all spent time recuperating and like recovering from everything that we went through. And honestly, I could have never made that trip financially if I was still teaching. So I'm trying to find a balance, and I'm trying to be proactive about just carving out that intentional time. And what I do during that week or a couple days, like, I'll figure that out. But it's important to, I think, from the outset, carve that time out intentionally. So I'm trying to get better at it. Yeah. And then the last thing I kind of want to talk about is how life is just funny sometimes. And so I left teaching for a number of reasons. And one of them was because I had a really significant leadership change that was kind of the catalyst for a bunch of different things. And I'm very open and honest that that change affected everyone. Like, it wasn't just me. The kids had a really hard time. The parents had a hard time. The people who were new in those leadership positions, they had a hard time. Like, it was struggle bus for everyone. And it was something that, ultimately led to me making the decision to, for the first time in a very long time, prioritizing my own growth and development over others. And it was very bittersweet, y'all, because I loved the community that we had there, but I just felt like, for my own sake, I needed to do something different and not be in that environment anymore. And you feel guilty doing that, especially when, you don't know what's next. But I will tell you, I knew that I had made the right decision when that August I didn't have to go back to school. And the relief that I felt from that was so affirming. But it took a lot of time for me to kind of process everything that had happened in that change, and kind of come back from a place where I lost a little bit of my own self-worth and my value, and kind of work through that. But wouldn't you know, 6 months into this position that I'm in now, went through a big leadership change. And it was challenging, but I was so much better prepared to kind of go through that process. I don't know that I'll ever be like grateful that that happened to me while I was teaching, but I am really, I'm not quite there yet. But I am really proud of the way that I was able to get through it, and am appreciative of how it has helped me navigate this new change. So the big lesson learned there is that you have to kind of allow yourself the time and the space to work through those past traumas, and then know whatever it is that you're leaving your past position for, I think you just need to be prepared that like you may go through that again, because those instances, those experiences are not singular to where you are now. Like those kinds of things can happen wherever you are and with whatever group of people. And I think it just is really comforting to know that I've been through a huge change like that, and I was able to go through a huge change like that again and come out on the other side better, and know how to better take care of myself through that process and how to better support others who were going through that process. So it was a hard lesson learned, but it was, it's been good for me to kind of reflect on my past and find ways to move through it, and really that there is no deadline for healing on those kinds of things. And it's just been nice to kind of give myself grace and have something good come out of those, experiences. So yeah. Dawn says, I interviewed 31 teachers who left. Most mentioned leadership. Yeah, it is rough out there in education. And I definitely don't admire administrators in education and teachers in education. It's really hard. And it's one of those professions that, people think they have an idea of what is involved, but man, there's so much involved in that job. You're a teacher, you're a therapist sometimes. You have to kind of toe the line of being a parent and a mentor, and keep those boundaries clear. It's really challenging. It's rough. It takes a toll on you personally. And I think that toll just kind of caught up with me. But it also helped me realize that I want more out of life than just to kind of live for my job. I want more of a work-life balance, because I did not have that. And anyone who, teaching already takes a lot out of you time-wise, but anyone who is involved in things like extracurriculars, like you're teaching all day, and then you've got rehearsal or practice in the afternoon, you're there on weekends, like you end up spending more time with these people than you do your families. And when you've been doing it for so long, you kind of forget that there is another path out there for you, that like life doesn't have to be like that. And I think more than anything, it was an opportunity for me to figure out what would be like outside of that world. As much as I loved that world, my mental health is better, my work-life balance is better. And I think for the first time, I kind of have put myself first, which again, I struggle with like feeling guilty and feeling selfish about that. But a year into it, not anymore. Like it was the best decision that I've ever made career-wise. Oh yeah, like Abby says, on Sunday night you would think, where did the weekend go? I don't have Sunday scaries anymore. Like it is so lovely. There will be moments throughout the year where I was like, it's musical season right now. And like I would be up at the school until like 1, 2 in the morning, painting sets, sewing costumes. Like, and that's not my life anymore. Like my life has, like Mark said, August scaries. My life has slowed down exponentially, but in the most beautiful way, y'all. Like it's really lovely. All right, so I want to pause there and see if anyone has any questions. Karen has one. She said, Working with SMEs, do you have any good lines or approaches in helping busy SMEs realize the benefits of your work in L&D? Okay, that's a good question. This is something that I'm still learning, and I mentioned earlier that I'm working with my team on developing documentation for processes and procedures. And our team is still really young, so we're trying this year to have it be a priority where we're getting our ducks in a row, because being open with SMEs from the get-go on what our role is as an instructional designer, what their role and what they care about really is their involvement, kind of setting those expectations at the forefront and being open and as communicative about that as possible will help prevent surprises coming up throughout the process. So I think it's so important that before you even jump into like a kickoff meeting, you really, as an education team, figure out what the timeline is going to be for a project and the level of involvement that you'll need from your SMEs. Because if they can see a realistic view of how much time they'll be asked to devote to this, and that you respect their time, I think that goes a long way. The other thing that really helped me was that I try to come to that first meeting with something of substance, whether that is like content wise. So, whether that is a draft outline of learning tracks for a course or a draft outline for a course, like the sooner you can have something for them to give feedback on, I think the more prosperous your partnership will be. Because if you go to that first meeting just talking in like, what ifs, or it will look like this in the future, or what we're planning is this, I think that that can be challenging for them to kind of wrap their head around. And in every, in every instance where you're communicating with them or working with them, you just want to work as efficiently as possible. So I try to bring something to that first meeting where they can jump in right away. And that's something that's helped me. Is job shadowing a thing in the corporate world? Oh, that's a good question, Tiffany. I don't know, but I think it would be worth, like, if you have someone in mind that you would want to job shadow, I think it would be worth reaching out to them and asking them if that is a possibility. I think, oh, that's such a cool idea. I don't know. Now my wheels are spinning. Like, how could we make this a thing? I don't know if that's a thing, but I think it's worth asking. Like, the worst they can say is no, right? I think it's worth it to kind of get the reality of the ins and outs of what a normal day would look like. I highly recommend asking. That sounds like a really cool idea. Oh, Stephanie. Yes. Stephanie asks, thanks. Thanks, Abby. Have you found any biases against or for you as an educator who transitioned into L&D? 100%. Yes. I faced a lot of this in my application process and in my interview process. I think, like I said earlier, the general public kind of has this idea of like what being a teacher is. And so I think there's two problems that transitioning teachers face, or two major problems, is kind of overcoming that stigma of what being a teacher is. And the second one is, it is on us to effectively communicate and portray that our skills are applicable to careers in learning and development. So I mentioned this a little bit on Monday, but learning and development for a teacher is a brand new world. But for a lot of the hiring managers in L&D, education is a brand new world to them. It's not something that they know the intricacies of and the ins and outs of. So there is some kind of responsibility on us as teachers to kind of educate them in a way. And I think, the greatest way to do this is in the interview, because you can really speak to a variety of different instances. But the first way to do that is in your resume, and really getting your resume down and being able to translate your teaching experience into skills that would be applicable for learning and development. But yeah, there are biases out there. And, it's nothing that I ever took personally. It was just a challenge that I had to overcome and kind of figure out how to work through it. I have an article that I wrote on my LinkedIn about that teacher stigma. I think it's still posted if you want to go read through that. Thank you, Karen. Did you do any bridging courses on adult learning theory, etc., to help with your transition? Yeah. So I did a lot of research into learning things like ideology, into kind of recognizing that teaching kids and students is very different than teaching adults. And I, read a lot of articles. One resource that really helped me wrap my head around the idea of training. Oh man, I'm gonna forget it. It was a book that I read. I'll give you the gist of it, and then after this, I'll put in the comments so you can come back and see what the book title was. But it talked about training in that in education, you kind of teach for knowledge sake, right? The kids have to learn, you test them on what they've learned. In learning and development, you are creating training to close a performance gap. So there's a difference there. You're not just learning to learn, you are training to upskill on a performance gap. And it also helped me figure out that not every problem will have training as their solution, right? It helped me understand like the analysis that goes into deciding whether or not training is even the solution, and the ways in which you should kind of approach building your training. So there wasn't a particular course, but I for sure had to do some research, and I promise I will go and find the book title and put that in the chat later. Okay, Mark. Student objectives and training quickly, so mom's just mentioned audio. Oh, yeah. Okay, so a learning objective is really important because especially when working with SMEs, they will want to throw everything and the kitchen sink into your training, right? So having from the outset what your learning objective is and having that be the driving force is so important, because you'll be able to reference back to it throughout the process when inevitably the SMEs want to throw in more content that maybe is not necessarily applicable for this certain course. So it's something that we talk about in the kickoff meeting for sure. But it's also something that as we're developing our processes and procedures right now, we're working on a resource where the SMEs will be able to go back and have that learning objective, be able to reference it all the time. So yeah, it's something we state right away in the first meeting, but then it's also something that we're able to go back and reference. So right now we're working on the process of like creating documentation for that. But we try to do it verbally and also in text, like in a resource. Oh. needs assessment, just watching and seeing where the problem may lie. So do you mean like, oh, that was, okay, Tiffany, I'm confused. What? Okay, I need to go back to your first question. Tiffany, are you clarifying about shadowing? Or are you asking about the learning objective? Oh, needs analysis. Okay, got it. Yeah. Oh, shadowing. Oh, okay. So Tiffany, yes, I understand now. Sorry, it took me a minute. There's a really great book out there. This one I remember the name of. It's called Map It by Kathy Moore. And this was a really great tool for me to understand how to do an analysis of, or an assessment of a performance gap. And it was a really great resource because it not only walks you through the process of how to approach a problem, but once you decide that training is the right solution for that, how to bring on your SMEs and how to have that learning objective, like Mark mentioned earlier, be the driving force through your process. So Map It by Kathy Moore is a great resource for that. And also, like you're mentioning, talks a lot about behavior. So I would recommend that. She definitely was able, she can obviously is an expert in that area and can speak to it more articulately, more articulate. She can speak to it better than I can at this current moment. I hope that helped. I know that was a little convoluted, but yeah.
Was that all the questions we had? It's okay. So. It's okay if so. Chrissy has graciously offered to hang out at a table for a little bit. So if any of you would like to continue the conversation in a smaller setting where we can actually look at each other face to face, feel free to grab a table. But otherwise, I think we'll go ahead and close it out since no one seems to have a question they'd like to ask the whole group. But join me in a round of applause for Chrissy here for her second session and all the insights she's been able to offer us on a whole year in reflection in instructional design. We really appreciate you being here, Chrissy, and sharing your insights and inspiring the next, I don't want to say generation, but sort of the next group of aspiring instructional designers. So for those of you that aren't sure where to find the tables, once you exit the session, they'll be in the lounge. So go ahead and find Chrissy at a table and enjoy your conversations. We'll see everybody back for our last session of the day. It'll be 3 p.m. Mountain Time, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy your afternoon.